Captain Marcus Chen stood at the viewing deck of the Galactic Council station, watching ships from 100 different worlds dock and undock in the massive spaceport. The station was a marvel of engineering, built by the Zephyrians with their advanced crystal technology. Everything gleamed with an otherworldly beauty that made most visitors gasp in wonder. Marcus didn't gasp. He'd seen enough wonders in his 40 years to know that pretty things often hid ugly truths. "Magnificent, isn't it?" came a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Ambassador Veltar of the Hegemony approaching, his forearms spread wide in what his species considered a welcoming gesture. The Velnari were tall, elegant beings with smooth blue skin and large, expressive eyes. They were also some of the most arrogant creatures in the known galaxy. "It's something," Marcus replied carefully. 3 years of diplomatic service had taught him to measure his words around aliens, especially the ones who thought they were better than everyone else. Veltar's laugh was like the tinkling of wind chimes. "Such restraint! I forgot you humans come from that dreadful little world. What do you call it? Dirt? Earth?" He waved one of his hands dismissively. Such a primitive name for such a primitive place. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral. This was exactly the kind of conversation he'd been having for 3 years straight. Ever since humanity had been granted membership in the Galactic Council, they'd been treated like country cousins at a fancy dinner party. Tolerated, but barely. "Earth has its charms," Marcus said. "Oh, I'm sure it does. Volcanic eruptions, devastating storms, predatory wildlife, tectonic instability." Veltar shuddered dramatically. "How your species survived long enough to achieve space travel is beyond comprehension. Though I suppose the constant struggle for survival did make you rather hardy." The word hardy came out like Veltar was describing particularly resilient bacteria. "The council meeting starts in 20 minutes, Marcus said, changing the subject. "Will the Hegemony be presenting their proposal for the mining rights on Kepler 442b? Veltar's expression shifted to one of smug satisfaction. "Indeed we will. The Hegemony has the most advanced extraction technology and the most experienced teams. It's only logical that we should be awarded the contract." "What about the Corvan Syndicate? Their bid was lower." "The Corvans?" Veltar laughed again. "They're merchants and traders, not engineers, and certainly not qualified for such a delicate operation. No, this requires the touch of a truly advanced civilization." Marcus nodded slowly. He'd heard this song before, with different lyrics but the same tune. The Hegemony was advanced, the Zephyrians were enlightened, the Altarian Federation was sophisticated. Every major power in the galaxy had their thing, their special quality that made them inherently superior to everyone else. Humans were hardy. That was it. That was their defining characteristic in the eyes of the galaxy. Not innovative, not brave, not intelligent. Hardy, like cockroaches or weeds. "Captain Chen," another voice called. Marcus turned to see Dr. Sarah Kim approaching. Her face flushed with the particular kind of frustration that came from dealing with alien bureaucracy. Sarah was the human representative to the Council's Science Division, a brilliant xenobiologist who'd made groundbreaking discoveries about life in extreme environments. "Dr. Kim," Marcus nodded. "How did the presentation go?" "About as well as expected," Sarah said, shooting a meaningful look at Veltar. "The Ethereal Collective has decided that humans lack the refined sensibilities necessary to participate in the Deep Space Archaeological Initiative." Veltar made a sound that might have been agreement. "Archaeological work requires a certain delicacy of approach, a respect for ancient wisdom that comes from having an ancient civilization oneself." "Right," Sarah said, her voice flat. "Because a species that's been spacefaring for 50 years couldn't possibly understand the importance of preserving historical sites." "Precisely!" Veltar seemed pleased that Sarah understood. It's nothing personal, of course. Every species has its strengths. Yours is survival. Ours is culture, art, and the higher pursuits of civilization. Marcus watched Sarah's hands clench into fists and decided it was time to extract them both from this conversation before she said something that would require him to file an incident report. "We should get going," he said. "Don't want to be late for the council session." They walked away from Veltar, who remained at the viewing deck admiring his reflection in the polished surface. Once they were out of earshot, Sarah let out a long breath. "I swear, Marcus, I'm about ready to show them exactly how hardy we can be." "I know the feeling," Marcus said. "But we have to play the long game here. Humanity needs the Council's resources and trade agreements." "Do we really?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes I wonder if we'd be better off on our own." They entered the Council chambers, a vast amphitheater with seating arranged in concentric circles. Each species had their designated area, with the more influential civilizations closer to the center. Humanity's seats were in the outer ring, near the bottom. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The session began with the usual pageantry. High Counselor Zixandra of the Ethereal Collective floated to the center podium, her translucent form shimmering with internal light. The Ethereals were beings of pure energy who'd long ago transcended physical form, which apparently made them the wisest creatures in the galaxy, at least according to them. "Honored representatives," Zixandra's voice resonated through the chamber without any visible mouth moving, "we gather today to discuss matters of great importance to our collective future." The first item on the agenda was the Kepler 442b mining rights. As expected, the debate was less a discussion of merits and more a showcase of which species could deliver the most eloquent speech about their own superiority. The hegemony representative, Fleet Admiral Kex Thor, spoke of their unmatched technological prowess and centuries of extraction experience. The Zephyrian delegate waxed poetic about their harmony with natural crystalline formations. Even the usually practical Corvin Syndicate representative managed to work in a few lines about their time-tested methodologies and proven efficiency. When it came time for questions, Counselor Thane of the Altarian Federation stood up. The Altarians were humanoid, but taller and more graceful than humans, with elongated features that they considered the height of aesthetic perfection. "I have concerns about the environmental impact assessments," Thane said, his voice carrying the refined accent that all Altarians seemed to cultivate. "This planet has unique ecosystems that could be irreversibly damaged by crude extraction methods." Admiral Kex Thor's 4 eyes narrowed. "The hegemony's methods are anything but crude, Counselor. We've been perfecting these techniques since before your species achieved warp drive. Age does not necessarily equate to wisdom," Thane replied smoothly. "The Altarian Federation believes that a more sophisticated approach is required." And so it went, back and forth, each species trying to prove they were the most qualified by pointing out how they were superior to everyone else. Marcus listened to it all with growing irritation. Finally, Zixandra called for other input. "Are there any additional perspectives on this matter?" Marcus stood up. Conversations around the chamber died down as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward the human section. It was rare for humans to speak during major debates. They were usually content to sit quietly and vote with whichever faction was willing to throw them a few scraps. "The human delegation would like to submit a bid for the Kepler 442b project," Marcus said. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the subtle hum of the station's life support systems. Then, slowly, a sound began to ripple through the chamber. It took Marcus a moment to realize what it was. Laughter. It started with a few barely suppressed chuckles and quickly spread. The Velnari delegation was openly giggling. The Zephyrians were making their equivalent of amused, chittering sounds. Even the usually stoic Corvin representatives seemed to be fighting smiles. High Counselor Zix Andra's form flickered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as surprise. "Captain Chen," she said, "I'm not certain I understand. Humans have no experience with large-scale mining operations in space. We have extensive experience with resource extraction in hostile environments," Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the ongoing murmurs of amusement. Admiral Kexthor rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over the other delegates. "With respect to our human colleagues," he said, not sounding respectful at all, "this operation requires precision, advanced technology, and sophisticated planning, not brute force survival tactics." "The Hegemony Admiral makes a valid point," Thane added. "While we all admire humanity's tenacity, this project demands qualities that are simply beyond the scope of a Deathworld species." That word again. Deathworld. It was how they categorized Earth and, by extension, humanity. Not homeworld, not birthworld. Deathworld. A place so dangerous that anyone who evolved there had to be tough to survive, but also so primitive that they couldn't possibly develop true civilization. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Marcus, what are you doing?" Marcus didn't answer. He was watching the faces around the chamber, cataloging the expressions of condescension, amusement, and outright dismissal. 3 years of being patted on the head like well-behaved pets. 3 years of being told they were hardy, resilient, tough enough to survive, but not smart enough, not advanced enough, not civilized enough to matter. "Perhaps," he said, raising his voice slightly, "the Council would be interested in a demonstration of human capabilities." The laughter died down. Zixandra's form pulsed with what might have been curiosity. "What kind of demonstration, Captain?" "A competition," Marcus said. "The traditional method for settling disputes when multiple parties claim superiority." Admiral Kexthor made a sound that could have been a snort. "You wish to compete with the Hegemony for mining rights? On what grounds?" "Pick them," Marcus said simply. "Engineering challenge, strategic planning, resource management, environmental assessment, whatever criteria the Council deems most relevant. Let the results speak for themselves." The chamber erupted in conversation. Marcus could hear fragments of discussion in a dozen different languages and communication methods. The general tone seemed to range from amused to incredulous. Counselor Thane stood again. "Captain Chen, I appreciate humanity's enthusiasm, but surely you understand the scope of what you're proposing. This isn't some wilderness survival exercise. This is a complex industrial operation requiring the highest levels of technical expertise." "Then it should be easy for the more advanced species to demonstrate their superiority," Marcus replied. "If humans are as primitive as everyone seems to think, what's the risk in proving it?" That got their attention. Across the chamber, Marcus could see delegates sitting up straighter, their expressions shifting from amusement to something more calculating. Being challenged publicly by a Deathworld species was one thing. Being afraid to accept that challenge was quite another. High Counselor Zixandra floated higher, her form brightening. "This is unprecedented. The Council has never settled contract disputes through direct competition. The Council has also never had a situation where multiple parties claim to be uniquely qualified," Marcus said. "This seems like an efficient way to determine who's actually best suited for the job." Admiral Kexthor's 4 arms were now crossed over his chest. "Very well," he said, his voice carrying a note of dangerous satisfaction. "The Hegemony accepts your challenge, humans. Choose your best representatives. We'll show you what true superiority looks like." Thane looked less pleased, but nodded agreement. "The Altarian Federation will also participate, though I must say, Captain, I hope you're prepared for disappointment." One by one, the other major powers agreed to participate. The Zephyrians, confident in their crystal technology. The ethereal collective, certain of their advanced wisdom. Even the Corvin Syndicate, seeing an opportunity to prove their practical efficiency. As the session adjourned and delegates began filing out, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Sarah looking at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You realize we just challenged the entire galactic community to a contest we have no chance of winning," she said. "Do we?" Marcus asked. "Have no chance?" Sarah considered this. "Well, when you put it that way, we're from Earth. Impossible is kind of our specialty." "Exactly," Marcus said. "They think they know what humans are capable of because they've only seen us being polite and diplomatic. Maybe it's time we reminded them why our planet is classified as a death world." As they walked back toward the human quarters, neither of them noticed the small figure that had been listening from the shadows near the chamber entrance. Pip was a Grex, one of the maintenance species that kept the station running. The Grex were barely 3 feet tall, covered in gray fur, and generally ignored by the major powers. But Pip had been watching the humans for months now, and unlike the others, he'd noticed things. The way they moved through the station's maintenance tunnels without hesitation, navigating spaces that made other species claustrophobic. How they handled equipment failures with a calm efficiency that spoke of extensive experience with things going wrong. The quiet competence they displayed when they thought no one was watching. Pip scurried back to his quarters and activated his personal communicator. The message he sent was encrypted and directed to a very specific recipient on a very specific world. "The Deathworlders have finally decided to show their teeth," the message read. "This should be interesting." The competition arena was unlike anything the Galactic Council had ever constructed. Built in the span of just 2 weeks using rapid fabrication technology, it contained multiple environments designed to test every aspect of mining and industrial operations. There were asteroid fields for precision extraction, unstable planetary surfaces for environmental assessment, and even a section with artificial gravity fluctuations to simulate the challenging conditions of Kepler 442b. Marcus stood in the observation deck above the arena, watching the various teams make their final preparations. Each major power had brought their absolute best. The hegemony had sent Admiral Kexthor himself, along with their most decorated engineers and their latest extraction technology. The Altarian Federation had deployed their top environmental scientists and their most advanced harmonic resonance equipment. The Zephyrians had brought crystal matrix computers that could process millions of variables simultaneously. "Second thoughts?" Sarah asked, joining him at the railing. "Only about 100, Marcus admitted, but it's too late now." Below them, the human team was making their preparations. It was a much smaller group than the others, just 6 people compared to the 20 or 30 each alien faction had brought. But Marcus had chosen each member carefully. There was Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, a former asteroid miner who'd spent 15 years working the belt around Sol. His hands were scarred from countless equipment repairs in hard vacuum, and he could jury-rig solutions from spare parts that would make a Corvin engineer weep with envy. Dr. Elena Vasquez was there, a geologist who'd spent most of her career studying active volcanic systems. She'd once crawled into a lava tube on Io to collect samples while the moon's surface was actively reshaping itself around her. Chief Engineer Amy Park had designed mining equipment for some of the most hostile environments in human space. Her specialty was building things that worked when everything else failed, which happened more often than most species would consider acceptable. Tommy Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the name, was a systems analyst who'd grown up on Mars during the early terraforming days. He'd learned to think in terms of interconnected systems and cascade failures, skills that proved invaluable when working with complex industrial operations. Dr. David Okafor was an environmental scientist who'd spent decades studying Earth's most extreme ecosystems. His job was to ensure that mining operations didn't destroy the very things they were meant to extract. Finally, there was Captain Lisa Rodriguez, who'd commanded deep space mining ships for over a decade. She had a reputation for bringing crews home safely even when everything went wrong, which in human space operations happened with alarming regularity. 6 humans against the greatest minds in the galaxy, Sarah said. Either we're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Why not both? Marcus replied. The competition was structured in 3 phases. First, teams would be given detailed scans and surveys of a simulated asteroid field and asked to develop extraction plans. Second, they would implement their plans using remote-controlled equipment in the arena's asteroid simulation chamber. Finally, they would be presented with a series of crisis scenarios and asked to adapt their operations accordingly. High Counselor Zixandra floated down to the arena floor, her ethereal form casting shifting patterns of light across the assembled teams. "Honored competitors," her voice resonated through the space. "You have 3 standard hours to analyze the provided data and submit your extraction plans. The evaluation criteria include efficiency, environmental impact, resource recovery rates, and operational safety. You may begin." Marcus watched through the observation deck monitors as the teams dispersed to their assigned workstations. The hegemony team immediately began assembling what looked like a small command center, with holographic displays showing the asteroid field from every conceivable angle. Admiral Kexthor stood at the center, his 4 arms moving in precise gestures as he directed his subordinates. The Altarian team took a more contemplative approach, gathering in a circle for what appeared to be a meditative planning session. Their leader, Chief Architect Vel Shan, had his eyes closed and his hands pressed together as his team shared their insights through some kind of telepathic link. The Zephyrians were running calculations on their crystal computers, the devices humming with harmonic resonances that made the nearby equipment vibrate. Their team leader, Matrix Coordinator Sixtail, had her hands immersed in a glowing crystal interface that was processing data faster than any conventional computer. The human team had gathered around a single table with paper notebooks and styluses. "Are they writing by hand?" one of the alien observers asked, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Primitive," another replied, "though I suppose they're doing their best." Marcus bit back a response. Let them think what they wanted. He'd seen this particular group of humans work before, and he knew that what looked like simplicity was actually something far more sophisticated. Jake Morrison was sketching asteroid layouts with quick, confident strokes, his hands moving with the precision of someone who'd spent decades working in 3-dimensional space. Elena Vasquez was making notes about mineral composition and structural integrity, her analysis based on years of experience with unstable geological formations. Amy Park was designing equipment modifications on the fly, creating solutions for problems the other teams hadn't even identified yet. Tommy Chen was the one who surprised the observers. While the other teams were focused on their individual specialties, he was mapping out system interconnections, identifying potential failure points, and creating contingency plans for scenarios that the official briefing hadn't mentioned. "They're planning for things to go wrong," Sarah observed. "Of course they are," Marcus said. "They're human." The first phase ended with all teams submitting their plans. The evaluation committee consisted of representatives from various council species, with High Counselor Zixandra overseeing the process. The results were announced an hour later. "The Zephyrian plan achieves the highest theoretical efficiency rating," Zixandra announced. "The Altarian approach shows excellent environmental consideration. The hegemony design demonstrates superior technological integration." She paused, her form flickering slightly. "The human plan is unusual. It achieves moderate ratings in all categories, but includes extensive contingency protocols that appear to be unnecessary given the simulation parameters." Admiral Kexthor made a sound that might have been amusement. typical Deathworld thinking. They assume everything will go wrong because on their primitive world everything does. We shall see how these approaches perform in practice, Zixandra said diplomatically. The second phase began immediately. Teams were given control of sophisticated mining equipment in the arena's asteroid simulation chamber. The asteroids were holographic projections, but the equipment was real: cutting beams, gravity manipulators, collection vessels, and all the other tools needed for a full-scale extraction operation. The hegemony team worked with mechanical precision. Their equipment moved in perfect coordination, following Admiral Kexthor's commands with military efficiency. They began with the largest, most valuable asteroids, using their advanced beam technology to slice away exact sections for processing. The Altarians took a more artistic approach, their equipment moving in flowing patterns that seemed to dance around the asteroids. They were extracting minerals in ways that preserved the natural beauty of the formations, turning industrial work into something resembling sculpture. The Zephyrians were fastest, their crystal-controlled equipment operating at speeds that made the other team's efforts look sluggish by comparison. They were processing asteroids faster than the collection vessels could keep up, a whirlwind of efficient extraction. The humans started slower than everyone else. Technical difficulties? Admiral Kexthor asked, loud enough for the human team to hear. Captain Rodriguez looked up from her control station. "Just getting a feel for the equipment," she said calmly. What she didn't mention was that Jake Morrison had spent the first 10 minutes running diagnostics on all their equipment, checking for potential failure points. Elena Vasquez had been analyzing the asteroid compositions in more detail than the initial scans provided, looking for structural weaknesses that might cause problems. Amy Park had been modifying their cutting tools for better performance and reliability. When the human team finally began their extraction operation, they moved differently than the others. Instead of going for the largest or richest asteroids first, they started with smaller ones that seemed strategically positioned. Tommy Chen was orchestrating their movements like a chess game, positioning their equipment for maximum flexibility. "Inefficient," one of the observers commented. "They're wasting time on low-value targets." But Marcus was watching more closely. The human team wasn't just extracting minerals, they were reshaping the entire asteroid field. Each asteroid they processed changed the gravitational dynamics, creating new movement patterns and opportunities. They were thinking 3 moves ahead, while the other teams focused on immediate gains. 20 minutes into the phase, the first crisis hit. One of the larger asteroids in the hegemony's target area began showing signs of structural instability. It was a planned part of the simulation, designed to test how teams responded to unexpected problems. Admiral Kexthor immediately ordered his team to withdraw and reassess. "Unfortunate," Zixandra commented, "but a prudent response given the potential danger." The Altarian team also pulled back, their leader calling for a collective meditation to determine the best course of action. The Zephyrians ran new calculations and adjusted their approach accordingly. The humans kept working. "Should we warn them?" one of the alien observers asked. Marcus said nothing. He was watching Jake Morrison's hands as the former asteroid miner made minute adjustments to his cutting beam. Morrison had seen unstable asteroids before, lots of them. In human mining operations, structural instability wasn't an emergency that required withdrawal and reassessment. It was Tuesday. Morrison's beam cut into the asteroid at precise angles, following fault lines that Elena Vasquez had identified from her geological analysis. Instead of trying to extract from the unstable rock, they were using its instability. Each cut was calculated to increase the stress in specific ways, channeling the asteroid's inevitable collapse along predetermined lines. The asteroid came apart in a controlled cascade, breaking into dozens of smaller pieces that were much easier to process. The humans had turned a crisis into an opportunity, gaining access to mineral deposits that would have been impossible to reach through conventional extraction. Remarkable, Zixandra said, her form brightening with surprise. They used the structural instability as a tool. Lucky guess, Admiral Kexthor said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The second crisis came 30 minutes later. A solar flare, another planned event, disrupted the electronic systems on all the mining equipment. The hegemony team immediately began running diagnostics on their sophisticated control systems. The Altarians started troubleshooting their harmonic resonance equipment. The Zephyrians' crystal computers began recalibrating their calculations. The human equipment kept working. Amy Park had spent her career designing mining equipment for environments where solar radiation was a constant problem. Every piece of human equipment in the simulation had redundant systems, hardened electronics, and manual backup controls. While the other teams worked to restore their high-tech solutions, the humans simply switched to backup modes that were designed to function under adverse conditions. "How are their systems still operational?" Chief Architect Velshan asked. "The human equipment appears to be designed for electromagnetic interference," one of the technical observers reported. "Their control systems have multiple redundancy layers." "Crude but effective," Matrix Coordinator Sixtel admitted grudgingly. The third crisis was the most severe. A cascade failure in the simulation's gravity generators created an unstable gravitational field that sent asteroids spinning unpredictably throughout the chamber. The hegemony team immediately declared the situation too dangerous and withdrew their equipment. The Altarians and Zephyrians followed suit, their sophisticated technology unable to compensate for the chaotic conditions. The humans not only continued working, they accelerated. Tommy Chen had been planning for exactly this scenario. His system maps had identified the gravity generators as a potential failure point, and he'd positioned their equipment to take advantage of gravitational anomalies rather than fight them. Captain Rodriguez had trained for decades in unstable conditions where gravity could shift without warning. The human team began using the chaotic gravitational fields to slingshot their equipment between asteroids, covering distances that would have been impossible under normal conditions. They were extracting minerals from asteroids that were tumbling end over end, their equipment dancing through the gravitational chaos like surfers riding a storm. "This is impossible," Admiral Kexthor said, his 4 eyes fixed on the display screens. "How are they maintaining operational control in those conditions?" "They're not controlling the conditions," Dr. Sarah Kim said from her position in the observation deck. "They're adapting to them." When the second phase ended, the results were undeniable. The human team had extracted more raw materials than any other group, with minimal equipment damage and 0 safety violations. They'd done it with older technology, smaller crews, and less sophisticated equipment than anyone else in the competition. "I don't understand," Matrix Coordinator Sixtel said during the evaluation break. "Their approach defies basic operational theory. Efficient extraction requires stable conditions and precise control." "Unless you're from a Deathworld," Captain Rodriguez said casually. "Then efficient extraction requires the ability to work when conditions are unstable and control is impossible." The observation deck was buzzing with conversation as the alien delegates tried to process what they'd witnessed. Marcus could hear fragments of discussion in multiple languages, all centered around the same basic question. How had the primitive Deathworld species outperformed the galaxy's most advanced civilizations? "Luck," Admiral Kexthor was insisting to a group of Corvin observers. "They got lucky with their positioning and timing." "Luck doesn't explain systematic adaptation to multiple crisis scenarios," one of the Corvins replied. "They weren't reacting to problems, they were anticipating them." High Counselor Zixandra floated over to where Marcus and Sarah were standing. Her form was pulsing with what Marcus had learned to recognize as deep thought. "Captain Chen," she said, "your team's performance has been illuminating. They operate under assumptions that are fundamentally different from conventional mining theory." "How so?" Marcus asked. Standard practice assumes optimal conditions and plans for efficiency within those parameters. Your team assumes suboptimal conditions and plans for adaptation regardless of circumstances. Makes sense, Marcus said. In our experience, optimal conditions are usually temporary. Because you're from a death world, Zixandra said, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, the word didn't sound dismissive. It sounded almost respectful. The third and final phase was about to begin, and Marcus could see the alien teams huddling together, reassessing their strategies. The humans had changed something fundamental about the competition just by being themselves. But the biggest shocks were still coming. The final phase of the competition began with an announcement that sent shockwaves through the observation deck. The third phase will simulate the actual conditions on Kepler 442b, High Counselor Zixandra declared. Teams will be presented with real-time data from the planet itself, including recent geological surveys that have revealed complications. Marcus felt his stomach drop as new information flooded the displays around the arena. Kepler 442b wasn't just another mining prospect. The planet was actively unstable, with massive tectonic shifts happening every few days. Solar radiation levels fluctuated wildly due to the system's binary star configuration. Most shocking of all, there were signs of ancient automated defense systems still functioning in the planet's crust. Defense systems? Admiral Kex Thor demanded. This information was not in the original briefing. Because we only discovered it 3 days ago, Zixandra replied, her ethereal form flickering with what might have been embarrassment. Deep probe analysis revealed that Kepler 442b was once home to a highly advanced civilization. They left behind Guardian protocols designed to prevent unauthorized resource extraction. The alien teams erupted into panicked discussions. The hegemony delegates were arguing about whether their equipment could handle automated defenses. The Altarians were debating the ethical implications of mining a planet with active Guardian systems. The Zephyrians were frantically recalculating their risk assessments. The human team barely reacted. Jake Morrison looked up from his console with mild interest. Automated defenses? Like what kind? Unknown, Zixandra admitted. The probe signals were jammed before detailed analysis could be completed. We know they exist, but not their capabilities or triggers. Elena Vasquez was already pulling up geological data on her tablet. Tectonic instability every few days? That's not bad. Yellowstone shifts more often than that. The radiation levels fluctuate by a factor of 10, one of the hegemony engineers protested. How can any equipment function in those conditions? Amy Park shrugged. You build it to handle 50 times normal radiation and assume the specs are lying to you. Standard practice. Marcus watched the alien teams with growing amazement. They were treating the new information like a catastrophic revelation, while the humans were discussing it like a minor inconvenience. The gap in perspective was so vast, it was almost comical. Perhaps we should postpone the competition, Chief Architect Velshan suggested. Allow teams time to reassess their approaches given this new information. No need, Captain Rodriguez said calmly. We're ready to proceed. Admiral Kex Thor turned his 4 eyes toward the human team with something approaching disbelief. Ready? You're ready to plan an operation on a planet with unknown defenses, massive geological instability, and lethal radiation fluctuations? Sounds like home, Tommy Chen said, matter-of-factly. That comment sent a ripple of silence through the observation deck. Marcus could see alien delegates turning to look at each other with dawning comprehension. For the first time, they were beginning to understand what being from a death world actually meant. The simulation will now incorporate real planetary conditions, Zixandra announced. Teams have 2 hours to develop operational plans and 1 hour to implement them. The evaluation criteria remain unchanged. Efficiency, environmental impact, resource recovery, and operational safety. The alien teams scattered to their workstations with visible urgency. The humans remained at their single table with their paper notebooks. "Shouldn't you be more concerned?" Matrix Coordinator Sixtel asked as she passed the human station. "About what?" Elena Vasquez replied. "The defense systems? We'll find them when we trigger them. The radiation? We've got shielding protocols. The tectonic activity? We'll work around it." "But you don't know what the defenses are capable of," Sixtel pressed. "Neither do you," Jake Morrison pointed out. "Difference is, we're used to not knowing what's going to try to kill us next." As the planning phase progressed, Marcus watched the stark differences in approach become even more pronounced. The hegemony team was trying to design countermeasures for every possible threat scenario, building elaborate contingency plans for each type of defense system they might encounter. The Altarians were attempting to develop communication protocols to negotiate with the Guardian systems. The Zephyrians were running probability calculations to determine the safest possible approach. The humans were planning like they always did. Assume everything would go wrong simultaneously and build solutions that worked anyway. "Look at this," Tommy Chen said, pointing to a geological survey map. "The mineral deposits are concentrated along these fault lines, prime earthquake territory." "Perfect," Elena Vasquez said. "We can use the seismic activity to break up the ore deposits. Save us having to blast them ourselves." "What about the radiation spikes?" Dr. Okafor asked. "We'll time our operations for the low radiation periods and use shielded equipment for everything else," Amy Park replied. "I've got designs for mining gear that'll function even if the radiation spikes to 100 times normal." "And the defenses?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "We'll be polite," Jake Morrison said with a grin. "Most automated systems are programmed to respond to threats. If we approach slowly, don't make aggressive moves, and retreat when warned, they'll probably leave us alone. And if they don't, then we'll adapt." The implementation phase began with all teams deploying their equipment into the simulation chamber, now configured to match Kepler 442b's hostile environment. The radiation levels were already climbing as the binary stars moved into their high-output configuration. The hegemony team's advanced equipment immediately began showing stress warnings. Admiral Kexthor ordered a withdrawal to safer orbital positions until the radiation spike passed. The Altarian team's delicate harmonic resonance equipment started malfunctioning within minutes, forcing them to switch to backup systems. The Zephyrians' crystal computers were powerful enough to handle the interference, but their mining equipment couldn't penetrate the planet's unstable crust. The human equipment not only functioned in the hostile conditions, it seemed to thrive in them. "How is this possible?" Admiral Kexthor demanded, watching as human mining gear continued operating at full capacity despite radiation levels that would kill most organic beings and fry most electronics. "Redundancy," Amy Park said simply. "Every system has backups, every backup has backups, and every component is designed to function at 50% efficiency even when 90% destroyed." The first tectonic event hit 30 minutes into the phase. A massive quake sent shockwaves through the planetary simulation, causing the alien team's equipment to lose positioning and stability. The humans barely slowed down. "They're using the seismic waves," one of the technical observers reported in amazement. "They've synchronized their extraction pattern with the tectonic rhythm." Elena Vasquez had mapped the fault lines so precisely that she could predict when and where the next quakes would hit. The human team was positioning their equipment to take advantage of each seismic event, using the planet's own geological violence as a mining tool. Then the Guardian systems activated. Warning signals blazed across every screen in the arena as ancient defense protocols came online. Massive energy pulses swept across the planetary surface, knocking out equipment and jamming communications. The simulation chamber filled with the shriek of alarm systems as team after team lost contact with their mining operations. "All teams withdraw immediately," Zixandra ordered. "The Guardian systems are active and hostile." The Hegemony, Altarian, and Zephyrian teams began emergency recall procedures for their equipment. Most of it was already offline or destroyed by the energy pulses. Their sophisticated technology had been overwhelmed by defenses that were older than their civilizations. The human team kept working. "Captain Rodriguez," Zixandra called urgently, "you need to extract your personnel immediately. The Guardian systems are targeting all mining operations." "No, they're not," Jake Morrison said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's communication system. "They're targeting hostile operations." On the screens showing the planetary surface, human mining equipment continued functioning normally, while energy pulses swept harmlessly around them. The Guardian systems were active, scanning, evaluating, and apparently deciding that the human operation wasn't a threat worth stopping. "How?" Admiral Kexthor whispered. "We're not fighting the planet," Captain Rodriguez explained. "We're working with it. Small-scale extraction following natural geological patterns, minimal environmental disruption, respectful approach to existing systems. The Guardians were designed to stop invaders, not partners." Tommy Chen had been right about defensive systems responding to aggressive actions. The human approach was so fundamentally non-threatening that the ancient protocols couldn't classify it as hostile. They were mining the planet like they belonged there, not like they were conquering it. When the final results were tallied an hour later, the numbers were staggering. The human team had extracted more resources than all other teams combined, with 0 equipment losses and no environmental damage. They'd done it while working in conditions that had completely shut down the galaxy's most advanced technology. But the real shock came when High Counselor Zixandra made her final announcement. "There is something the Council must reveal," she said, her ethereal form pulsing with nervousness. "The competition for Kepler 442b mining rights was not initiated by economic interest." A heavy silence fell over the arena. 3 weeks ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures moving toward the galactic core. Analysis suggests they are hostile vessels of unknown origin, more advanced than anything in our databases. Conservative projections indicate they will reach inhabited systems within 18 months. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "You're talking about an invasion." "The possibility exists," Zixandra admitted. "The Council has been evaluating our defensive capabilities, and the assessment is not encouraging. Our civilizations have grown comfortable with peace and prosperity. Our military technology is sophisticated but untested. Our populations are unprepared for large-scale conflict." Admiral Kexthor's 4 arms were trembling. "What does this have to do with the mining competition?" "Kepler 442b contains deposits of neutronium and exotic matter that could be used to construct weapons capable of harming the approaching vessels. But extracting these materials under hostile conditions in a war zone would require capabilities that most species simply do not possess." The pieces fell into place in Marcus's mind with sickening clarity. You weren't testing who could mine the planet most efficiently. You were testing who could survive doing it while under attack. "The human team's performance has been revelatory," Zixandra said. "Your species operates under assumptions that the rest of us cannot comprehend. You expect hostility, plan for catastrophe, and adapt to conditions that would destroy our civilizations." Sarah stepped forward from the observation deck. "So this was all a setup. You wanted to see if the Deathworld species could handle jobs that advanced civilizations couldn't." "Not a setup," Zixandra corrected. "A desperate evaluation of our options. The Council needs allies who can function in conditions where our technology fails, where our strategies become irrelevant, where survival depends on the ability to adapt rather than the ability to control." Chief Architect Vel Shan rose slowly from his seat. "You're asking us to accept that we need the primitive species more than they need us. I'm telling you that the approaching threat will not be impressed by our advanced technology or sophisticated culture," Zixandra replied. Ships that can travel between galaxies will not be stopped by weapons designed for civilized conflicts. We need allies who understand that sometimes the only way to survive is to be willing to do what others cannot. Matrix Coordinator. Sixtal's crystal interface was flickering with rapid calculations. The energy signatures you detected, they're consistent with technology that could glass entire worlds in minutes. Yes, Zixandra said simply. And when that happens, being from a death world won't be a disadvantage anymore. It will be the only advantage that matters. Admiral Kexthor looked around the arena at the human team, who were calmly packing up their equipment as if they hadn't just revolutionized galactic strategic thinking. What are you proposing? Full partnership, Zixandra said. Not junior membership. Not tolerated participation. Humanity becomes a senior member of the Galactic Council with full voting rights, military command authority, and access to all Council resources. In exchange for? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Teaching us how to fight like Deathworlders. The silence that followed was broken by Jake Morrison's quiet chuckle. You want us to show you how to survive when everything goes wrong. We want you to show us how to win when everything goes wrong, Zixandra corrected. Marcus looked around the arena at the assembled alien delegations. 3 days ago, these beings had treated humans like slightly clever animals. Now they were offering full partnership in the galaxy's most powerful organization. There's just one problem, Marcus said finally. Which is? You're assuming we're the only Deathworld species out there. Zixandra's form brightened. There are others? Oh yes, Marcus said, thinking of the encrypted message that had brought several other species to the station over the past few days. Species that the major powers ignored or dismissed, but who had been quietly watching the competition with great interest. There are dozens of us. We've been keeping in touch. Admiral Kexthor's 4 eyes went wide. A Deathworld alliance? More like a mutual support network, Sarah said. Turns out when you're all considered primitive by the advanced species, you tend to stick together. As if summoned by their words, Pip appeared at the arena entrance, followed by a group of beings that made the alien delegates take involuntary steps backward. There were the Gorvani, whose homeworld had gravity 3 times Earth standard and whose idea of agriculture involved taming carnivorous plants. The Sectar, who came from a tidally locked world where the day side was molten and the night side was frozen, and who thought temperature variations of several hundred degrees were minor inconveniences. The Thrix, whose planet orbited a pulsar and who had evolved natural resistance to radiation that would sterilize most worlds. And several others, all species that the Council had classified as too primitive or too dangerous to take seriously. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus announced, allow me to introduce the real Deathworld champions. The assembled alien delegates stared in stunned silence as they realized that what they'd thought was a single anomaly was actually an entire category of species they'd been systematically underestimating. How many? Admiral Kexthor whispered. 43 species at last count, Pip said, his small voice carrying clearly through the silent arena. We've been sharing information for years. Amazing what you can learn when nobody thinks you're worth paying attention to. And you're all willing to fight? Zixandra asked. The Gorvani representative, a massive being that looked like a cross between a bear and a tank, let out what might have been laughter. Fight? We've been preparing for this kind of war since we first heard about your civilized galaxy. You've all grown soft. We never had that luxury. The question, Marcus said, is whether you're ready to learn what it means to be genuinely galactic citizens instead of just the most advanced species in your local neighborhood. High Counselor Zixandra floated higher, her form blazing with new light. The Council hereby formally recognizes the Deathworld Alliance as senior partners in galactic defense. All member species are granted immediate full council status with all associated rights and privileges. And responsibilities, Marcus added. Because when those ships arrive, you're going to discover that survival isn't about having the best technology or the most sophisticated culture. It's about being too stubborn to quit, Jake Morrison said with a grin. Too adaptive to break, Elena Vasquez added. And too mean to die easy, Captain Rodriguez finished. As the alien delegates tried to process the complete reversal of galactic power dynamics that had just occurred, Marcus couldn't help but smile. 3 days ago, humanity had been the galaxy's pet Deathworlders. Now they were partners in the most important alliance in galactic history. The approaching invasion would be in for quite a surprise.